Almost one full calendar year has passed since North Carolina Public Schools last operated with full in person instruction. Assessing the current situation, our next guest has a column with this headline: The Absurdity of Continued School Closings. The author of that column is Ray Nothstine, opinion editor at Carolina Journal. And Ray, you looked at where we stand now, kind of looked at the time that we've been spending in this online learning, and you really do see this as absurd, don't you?
Yeah, I think the biggest absurdity of this is there's so many schools that are open, whether they be some public schools and most private schools, the vast majority, because they are responsive to the market. They've been open. They've had very little problems. And I think that's the biggest case for opening schools fully up, is that there has been little transmission. Dr. Mandy Cohen in North Carolina says it's safe. The CDC says it's safe. Other health officials, Anthony Fauci, have said it's safe. So to me, to continue to play politics on this is absurd, and I think it's something that needs to end. And there needs to be a political moment of courage from chief executives, governors across the United States, not just here in North Carolina, but to stand up to the teachers' unions and say, look, enough is enough. Stop playing games in politics. Let's open the schools. The science and data suggest they should be open.
Yeah, you mentioned the unions, and that's one of the key pieces in your column, the fact that the unions, not health officials, seem to be calling the shots, and that they have ever-changing goalposts. It isn't just the 15 days to flatten the curve anymore. Now some are saying let's not reopen until the COVID pandemic is completely eradicated. That doesn't seem to make sense.
Yeah, from a historical perspective, that makes no sense. I mean, the Spanish flu, kids continued to go to school. There was transmission. So we live in this weird time, and I wonder if it has something to do with just maybe our internet culture is where people think that they can do this prolonged. And there was an interesting video I saw from a young lady who kind of did this short video in her experience doing online school. And, she took a screen grab and a little video grab from each day, and it kind of showed her moments of despair. I mean, all the way going back from March, working on her bed alone on school projects. So, I mean, it's a huge deal. And with the unions, there was an interesting piece in the New York Post before my piece came out, and it was about how feminists, the one group that feminists should be standing up for are moms, especially working moms who have been hit the hardest, especially minority working women who've been hit the hardest by this pandemic. Because, let's be honest, one of the big advantages of public schools for many parents, and especially single parents, is it's a system of childcare. And if that's been taken away, then their whole kind of model and their whole basis suffers. And so I think just kind of looking at that nature, and just this interesting piece too in the New York Post with the woman who, the writer that kind of called out the feminist movement for siding with the unions and not for working moms who've been hit particularly hard. So there's a lot of things to navigate with this, and the unions, unfortunately, are changing the goalposts. You see this language about eradication, and it doesn't make a lot of sense because numbers are getting better. We should be moving towards openings, which the North Carolina General Assembly is starting to do.
One other thing I want to point out before we wrap it up is that as you conclude this piece, you actually make an interesting comparison talking about what's happening now with teacher unions and the union-like groups that act kind of like unions, and what happened with Ronald Reagan and the air traffic controllers back in the 1980s. I think a lot of people just hearing that off the top of their head are going to think, what do these two groups have to do with each other? But you use them to make an interesting contrast.
Well, there's a lot of differences, of course, but they're both government employees, both members of, in some states at least, government unions. And so I do want to draw that out just a little bit because, it's an important seminal moment from history that a lot of people know about it, especially if they're a little bit older. And I think the point I was really trying to make is you can't be a government employee because there's certain advantages that government employees have that the private sectors don't have. I mean, most private sector workers are at will employment. Government employees have much better job security and in many cases much better benefits in some circumstances. But I was just trying to draw out the point really that when government workers and workers that are employed by the state strike against the people or strike out against kind of the common good of what's going on in society, then they really become expendable. And that's really the point I'm trying to make, is that if these schools aren't serving the community, if they're not serving the taxpayer, if they're not living up to the Constitution of providing an education to North Carolinians, then that really is problematic. And in a way, their whole model and their whole infrastructure, I think, becomes expendable at the end of the day, and that's unfortunate.
If you'd like to read more, the title of the column is The Absurdity of Continued School Closings. Its author is Ray Nothstine, opinion editor at Carolina Journal. Thanks so much.
Thanks.